Welcome to Stream 8. I'm introducing David Hooker, and we're covering Is Human Ageing a Creational Good? Addressing Challenges and Providing Support. David is the Publications Director of ISCAST. He teaches in biomedical science at Monash University and has pastored an evangelical church in Melbourne. He has higher degrees in both science and theology. His recent PhD through the Australian College of Theology is a science theology synthesis on human ageing. Please welcome David.
Thank you, Ian. Welcome, everyone. Just a few contextual comments. In 2018, and for the first time in recorded human history, persons over 65 outnumbered those under 5. Those over 80 are now the fastest growing of any population fraction. This is understandably being called a tsunami of elderly and presents enormous economic and ethical challenges to societies. But it seems that the world isn't ready for this tsunami on attitudinal, emotional, and ethical levels. Of all the life stages, old age is perhaps the sole stage that can evoke aversion, expressed as fear of decline and morbidity, disgust by the non-aged over the unpleasantness of age bodily decline, and hatred in the form of elder abuse. Moreover, ageism keeps the aged at arm's length. And for those experiencing a genesis of ageing's decline, ageing anxiety is known to set in. And some in science aim to stop or reverse ageing, with the inference being that ageing is a life defect. Overall then, humanity struggles to accept and assimilate the aged and the ageing process. But what's the Western Christian theological perspective on human ageing? Our theology has a responsibility to communicate the will of God to God's world. Yet on the matter of human ageing, there are problems, gaps, and inconsistencies. When we examine Christian theology, we find firstly that it doesn't really say much. As theologians, we have much to say on creation, sin, death, and the imago Dei, yet comparatively little to say on the matter that is so intimately related, in fact, to those themes, human ageing. There is indeed a gap here. Secondly, we find a lack of dialogue with the sciences. Christian theology lags behind in its engagement with the tremendous progress in the science of ageing. I agree with Wolfhart Pannenberg, the famous 20th century theologian, when he says, to quote, "If theologians want to conceive of God as the creator of the real world, they cannot possibly bypass the scientific description of that world," unquote. Pannenberg himself does dialogue with science and ageing in his Anthropology and Theological Perspective. Yet since that 1985 work, considerable growth has occurred in our scientific understanding of the ageing process. Much more recently, the influential ethicist Gilbert Melander asked the question, should we live forever, in his book on ageing and lifespan? Yet his choice not to focus on the scientific question, how do we age, in favour of the question of purpose, why do we age, leaves a gap in theology's engagement with the science of ageing. Thirdly, there are logical challenges in a science theology synthesis. I won't be spending any time on that here, but I'll revisit that point later on the topic of death. Fourthly, it is in fact unsure what to say. Now, this is particularly highlighted when we ask, what is the core idea driving a theology of human ageing? There are influential voices on both sides. On one side, we have influential theologians saying that ageing belongs to the good in creation, people like Barth and Tillich. On this side, there is also the claim that the traditional position of Christian theology on ageing is that it is in fact a state of blessing, a period of growth and a religio-ethical witness, all positive attributes. But on the other side, over here, other influential theologians see human ageing as being part of the effect of sin in the world. People like Augustine, Aquinas, Pannenberg, and G.C. Berkouwer in his dialogue with Barth. Now, I need to emphasise a point here. We need to take note of the fact that the stakes are very high here. For a core theological idea, what could bring more polarised positions? Whether ageing is of God or not, whether ageing is a creational good or an effect of sin, is as disparate as heaven and hell, black and white. Clearly, there is a need for resolution within theology. And this couldn't be better highlighted by one more giant of theology, John Calvin. And where does he fall into these two groups? Well, in his Institutes, he says ageing is being among the blessings we receive from God, yet in his commentaries, he's quoted as writing, it's on account of our sins that we grow old and lose our strength. So overall, these problems, gaps and inconsistencies highlight a need for a clear, cohesive and constructive theological voice to society's negative mindset on human ageing. So there are three, I believe, persuasive and enduring challenges to this core idea that human ageing is a creational good. The first is the theory of the cosmic fall. This is that the first sin of humanity changed creation intrinsically, organically, leading to decay, death, ageing, etc., such that creation's goodness is ruined. The second is the ethical dilemmas of ageing's limitations and losses. The very real limitations and losses of ageing can't possibly be reconciled with the concept of ageing as creationally good. And the third one is that natural physical death as the precipitant of ageing is also the penalty for sin. Now, we won't consider the first two, but I want to spend some more time in the third one here as we move on. Let's take a look at natural physical death. Death troubles, puzzles and frightens human beings. Woody Allen is quoted as saying, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality through not dying. I don't want to live on in the hearts of my countrymen. I want to live on in my partners. It's a great quote. Oops, let's go back. But on the other hand, Tolkien, our very famous Christian author in the Silmarillion, takes a completely different tack when he implies very strongly that that mortality or death or dying is actually a law of the Creator. Popular Christian theology, and indeed much of Western theology, forges a strong link between the fall and human physical death. Sin leads to physical death. And of course, we all know the foundational text, Genesis 2:17 in the Eden story, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. And there's an example in popular theology. Does anyone know where this quote comes from? It's from the NIV Study Bible. So a very common, a very pervading theology of sin and death there. But what about the science? Well, the science says that there's an inseparable link between ageing and natural physical death. Ageing precipitates natural physical death. This is well accepted according to the WHO definition. So it would seem that a superficial synthesis of science and theology would say that ageing is the mechanism that enacts the fall's effects. But there are questions. What if the ageing process held evidence of genetically inbuilt processes? What shall Christian theology do with these intrinsic processes? Are they the manifestation of the fall or of creation? And if we conclude of creation, where does this place the precipitant of ageing, natural physical death, in the doctrines of Christian theology? It all rests on the interpretation of the word die in the Eden story. So let's revisit the Eden story. We'll do a very quick, a very brief run through of some exegesis of the Eden story. a structural exegetical approach using Walsh's very fine paper back in 1977. And in that paper, he says the meaning of a work of literature is communicated as much by the structure of the work as by the surface content. We'll be looking at chiasm in biblical literature and building upon the work of these authors. And we'll also consider a key question, upon what features do we build chiasm? Form, content, words, setting, or theme? I would argue that we don't have to be restricted to just one. So, although the Eden story has ancient Near Eastern parallels, because it presents humanity in a poor light in contrast to Sumerian origin myths, it may be intended in part as a polemic against A&E teachings about gods and humans. Some striking contrast between this narrative and the myth of Oedipus bear this out. Very quickly, looking at the contrasts here, Oedipus was gifted with knowledge, wisdom, but it was not intended that he have eternal life. Whereas in the Eden story, Adam was not gifted with knowledge and wisdom, but it was intended that he have eternal life. And each has counterparts in contrast there. So, although the Eden story has A&E parallels, because it presents humanity in a poor light in contrast to Sumerian origin myths, it may be intended in part as a polemic against A&E teachings about gods and humans. And it may also quite possibly be including the meaning of death in that polemic by transforming the meaning of death. So let's take a quick look at natural physical death as the penalty for sin. When we look at the Eden story, we can see, based on literary form, using Walsh's outline, we can see 7 scenes, and there are actors in their roles in the form of a personal drama that create the structure. The data within this proposed structure fit faultlessly with the 7 criteria for a valid chiasm. So, for example, at scene 1, where we have God as the sole actor, man passive and woman absent, is paralleling scene 7. Scene 2, God, the main actor, man active and passive, the woman is passive, parallels scene 6 and so on, with the central scene at scene 4. So scene 4 is the turning point from blessing to curse, from obedience to disobedience. And this is really making the Eden story not one of creation, but one of uncreation. But can we find chiastic structure based on theme? I would argue that the answer is yes. Using exactly the same delineated scenes, we see some theme anti-parallelism here. For example, in scene 1, we have man taken to Eden from the outside, whereas in scene 7 we have man driven from Eden to the outside. Scene 2, relationships between man, woman, creatures and the ground are established, whereas in scene 6 the anti-parallel themes come up as the relationships between man, woman, creatures and the ground disintegrated. So using form and theme in the Eden story, how does scene 4's central event of the eating of the fruit relate to the interpretation of the threat of death in 2:16 and 17 in scene 1? Here we take an accepted guideline that determines the validity of chiastic structure. In Lund's words, and with agreement with Thompson and Blomberg, identical ideas are distributed across the passage at the extremes and centre. In the Eden story, that means the centre scene 4 and the extreme scenes 1 and 7. So this is indeed the case with the Eden story, yet with one fascinating aberration. So let's look at that aberration. On the one side, the key themes at the extreme scene 1 are Eden, the placement of first humanity relative to Eden, the knowledge of good and evil, life and death, all explicitly mentioned. In scene 7, the mirroring scene, we have those same themes, except death is not mentioned. So death is tied explicitly to the eating in scene 1 and tied implicitly via scene 1's threat to the actual eating in the central scene 4. Yet the critical question is there an anti-parallel counterpart in scene 7 for the theme of death in scene 1? I would claim here that the theme of death is indeed in scene 7 and that the sentence of death threatened in scene 1 has its anti-parallel counterpart as the sentence of death realised in scene 7. But how is that sentence realised? The death threatened in scene 1 is the expulsion from Eden in scene 7, and its outworkings predicted in scene 6. So semantic, literary and historical considerations support this thesis. And it's also discussed by Wenham in another paper. So in summary, it's contended that the death is meant not as a physical death at all, but as a spiritual death, the end of life with God in his sanctuary, a life of friendship. This death is the negative change in the relationship with God. Thus, there is evidence to refute the claim that the sentence of death in Genesis 2:17 is natural physical death. Natural physical death is not the effect of the fall. Thus, leaving open the possibility that human ageing is in fact not an effect of sin, but the opposite of creational good. So let's move away from those challenges and let's look at one aspect of the science that supports the core idea that ageing is a creational good. Some, ageing is a disease, a fault, compelling a search for a cure. We need to associate defect and we tend to associate defect and disease with disorder and disarray, where the natural order of things breaks down. But does the ageing process actually fit this picture? Let's look at just one part of the picture that science gives us in this next slide. We're going to be focusing on the brain's hypothalamus, which is a master regulator of life, health, and growth processes. So when we look at this hypothalamus here, which is this tiny part of the brain, it's responsible for controlling appetite, thirst, body temperature, wake, sleep rhythms, heart rate, and reproduction, all life, health, and growth processes. But in 2013 and beyond, the work of Zhang et al. Broke new ground, seeking and finding answers to such a fundamental question as, does the brain have a programmatic role in the ageing process and in lifespan control? What was the answer? The answer was yes. So in fact, ageing is also one of the processes controlled by the hypothalamus. Zhang et al. Found that the steady elevation of hypothalamic transcription factor levels and the resultant drop in gonadotropin-releasing hormone levels initiates the end of reproduction and drives the normal ageing process. The authors conclude this well-received and important work by stating, our findings provide a proof of principle to the hypothesis that ageing is a life event and is programmed by the hypothalamus. But when we assimilate a lot more of what we know of ageing, we can come to a fascinating conclusion. In this next slide, we see various strata of biological structure, from molecules, moving up to programmed processes, moving up to organelles, which are little factories within cells, and onto a more complicated structure, the organ. In all of these different biological strata, we have various components that are responsible for life, health, and growth named there. For example, apoptosis in programmed processes. We find these very processes are also driving ageing. So to take mitochondria and cytochrome C as examples, both link us with the air we all breathe by using oxygen to generate the universal energy molecule of living cells, ATP. yet both also drive programmed cell death in the ageing of cells and tissues. In response to this, one may be tempted to say, remove apoptosis, remove cytochrome C, remove P53 and mitochondria and the hypothalamus, all those entities known to cause death and ageing, and we will have a better human being. But we cannot venture that thought, because these very entities are essential to life and health and growth. Without these entities, there would be no human body, there would be no human life. Thus, science confronts theology with the probability that ageing is built into created human life and therefore creationally good. Final slide. Just looking at the implications for living in our techno-scientific world. If human ageing is truly a creational good, then scientific and technological advances can be used to promote healthy ageing by reducing ageing-related disease and educating how to retain health as ageing progresses. But scientific advances should not be employed to halt or reverse ageing. The scientific mindset tends to fragment and categorise and atomise, even doing this for how we see human life. We need to see the human life, rather, from birth to old age as one whole, one continuum, with old age no less good than a young age. As well as these points, of course, the idea of a creationally good human ageing speaks in other ways. It builds a foundation upon which to reject age aversion, correct ageism, and challenge us to overcome anxiety toward the ageing process. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We have 2 questions so far. The first, an alternative theological explanation is that biological ageing is an indirect effect of being barred from the tree of life. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, that's why I think the science that I went into just a little bit there towards the end helps to answer that, because things like the molecules, the processes, the organelles and the organs are essential, critical for life, health and growth, but they also have a role in ageing. So we actually can't divide. We can't divide up the good from the ageing. If we did, we wouldn't have a human body.
Very good. Do you distinguish between restorative and enhancement texts in Christianity needing transhume?
Can we have that question again, please, Ian?
There's a little bit of grammatical error here somewhere, I think. Do you distinguish between restorative and enhancement texts in Christianity needing transhumanism, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of thinking about this, but I'm all for medicine trying to bring the human being back to its natural, normal state, but I'm not for the technology that enhances a human being to actually change human nature. So I wouldn't be promoting reversing human ageing, for example. Yeah. However, the story that I've presented today is a little simpler than the reality, because what I've been arguing for is that ageing as a creational good is what I call human biological ageing. In other words, the ageing to the maximal lifespan of 120 years. But of course, as it turns out, very, very few live that long. And so there are things in the world that that can affect the ageing process. And if we can eliminate those and move towards a healthy ageing that extends ageing and preserve health, then I'm all for that.
Thank you. I encourage you to bring your other questions to David afterwards. We have our next plenary session and how to. Thank you. Thank you, David.